Okay, let's continue this series about universal design. Another comment I got on a recent TikTok video was about whether or not we should be designing every building to be accessible for people with disabilities. And I want to start off right now because the commenter was basically taking the position that we should not have to design every building to be accessible for people with disabilities. And the commenter in a very small way, like 1%, was right and 99% wrong. The 1% that they were right kind of has to do with what's possible. So universal design precludes anything that's impossible. So if it's impossible to design a building in a way that's accessible for everyone, and especially for people with disabilities, then of course it wouldn't fall under universal design. Universal design does not, there's no expectation there that we invent massively new solutions. There is a principle around universal design that does deal with inventing new solutions, but fundamentally it's more about design processes where we start out at the beginning recognizing the need for people with disabilities and other marginalized groups to access and use those spaces, interfaces, what have you. So that would be the one caveat that I would give that commenter, that if it is impossible to design a building in a way that's accessible, then no, it does not fall under universal design, and of course that's okay. However, I do believe in most every instance it is possible, and that we do need to think critically about the ways in which we are designing buildings and user interfaces for technologies and everything else in society from the very beginning, trying to understand what it's like to be a person who is marginalized and how that relates to their ability to access and use those environments and spaces. And it doesn't just apply to kind of the basic structure of, for example, a building. You know, it's not just a matter of putting an elevator in a building or retrofitting something like that. It's a matter of making sure every space in that building is accessible and usable, including spaces like toilets and things like that. And I think this is just fundamental for someone's ability to participate in society. And so it's not a matter of, should we make all spaces accessible? We must make all spaces accessible. We cannot continue to exclude marginalized groups from society just because we didn't think about it. That's nonsense. And so I challenge this commenter because I think it's important, again, for us to be super, super critical about how we're thinking about this issue. Yes, if it's impossible to do, we are not necessarily required to do it. But if it is possible, we should absolutely be doing it. And I think the reason why the commenter came at this issue the way they did is because they probably never had the experience of living with a disability. And the reality is that if that person and most everyone else in the world live long enough, we will eventually acquire a disability, either a temporary disability or a permanent disability. And even if we don't, we are very likely to know someone who does. So even though you might say, oh, I don't need an accessible apartment, I don't need an accessible home, you may need at some point. And do you want to have to move house? Maybe it's the house you've been living in your entire life. Do you want to have to move out of that house because you've acquired a disability? What if you have a family member who wants to visit you and you don't have an accessible home? Are you going to be comfortable telling them that, no, you can't come to a celebration where we're all having a meal, or you can't come and visit your family because this building, this environment wasn't made to be accessible? So I would challenge that commenter just on the basis of their own privilege to think differently about the world around them, to think outside of the scope of their own experience, to try to have empathy and compassion for other individuals who may not share the same experiences that you share. And so, yes, not all buildings need to be accessible, but as many buildings as possible should absolutely be accessible for people with disabilities and everyone. Only then can we have a fully inclusive and a truly equal society.